April 1908. A farmhouse in Indiana burns to the ground. In the basement were 4 bodies, 3 small children, pressed together. Beside them, a woman with no head. The corpse is 5 inches too short and 50 pounds too light to be the woman who owned this farm. Belle Gunness did not die in that fire. So where did she go? Here is something most people do not realize. The story you are hearing right now almost stayed buried forever. Not because it was not important, but because finding it meant digging through hundreds of documents that nobody bothered to digitize. And honestly, I cannot do this alone. Right now, we are tens of thousands strong, but keeping these stories alive takes more than just views. It takes time in dusty archives, scanning old newspapers, piecing together fragments that history tried to erase. So if you want more of these stories that your history teacher never mentioned, do me a favor. Click the like button, subscribe, and if you can spare the price of a coffee, there is a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. It literally keeps me in the archives instead of taking a second job. Massive thanks to Jorge, who supported us recently, and to Dorothy, who is always with us in the comments. You are the reason stories like this do not die in forgotten filing cabinets. Now, let us continue. The smoke did not wake Belle Gunness's farmhand. The heat did. Joe Maxson bolted upright in his second-floor bedroom sometime before dawn on April 28, 1908. His lungs were already burning. By the time he stumbled into town and LaPorte's fire brigade reached McClung Road, there was nothing left to save. The farmhouse was a collapsing skeleton of flame. When the ashes cooled, authorities pulled 4 bodies from the basement. 3 were children, Myrtle and Lucy Sorensen, and 5-year-old Philip Gunness. They had been found pressed together, as though reaching for a mother who was not there to hold them. The 4th body belonged to an adult woman. She was headless. LaPorte grieved the way small towns do. Quietly, collectively, with the certainty that tragedy has a shape they already understand. The widow Gunness and her children were taken in the night. The suspect was obvious. Ray Lamphere, Belle's former handyman and sometime lover, had been spotted near the property. He was arrested within hours, but grief has a short memory. Evidence does not. Within days, a letter arrived from South Dakota. A man named Asle Helgalian was looking for his brother Andrew, who had traveled to this farm months earlier, carrying his life savings. Andrew had answered a personal advertisement Belle placed in a Norwegian newspaper. He came to LaPorte expecting love. He was never heard from again. Asle did not write to grieve. He wrote to demand answers. And when he arrived in person and insisted authorities dig beneath the hog pen, what the earth gave back was not one man's body. It was 11. The quiet widow of McClung Road was not a victim of that fire. She was its architect. Before she was a killer, she was poor. And poverty, in 19th century Norway, was its own kind of violence. Brynhild Paulsdottir Storseth was born in 1859 in Selbu, a small farming parish southeast of Trondheim. She was the youngest of 8 children in a family that owned almost nothing. Her father, a stonemason, died while she was still young. There was no inheritance, no safety net, just the slow understanding that if she wanted a different life, she would have to build it herself. She worked 3 years as a servant on a wealthy estate to earn her passage across the Atlantic. In 1881, at 21 years old, she left Norway for Chicago. Within 3 years, she married a fellow Norwegian immigrant named Mads Sorensen. They opened a confectionery store together. It burned down within the year. they bought a home. That burned too. Both times, insurance paid generously. Then, 2 of their children died in infancy. The official cause was acute colitis, a stomach condition. But colitis shares nearly every symptom with a particular kind of poisoning. No autopsies were performed. No questions were asked. The final piece fell into place on July 30th, 1900. That date mattered because it was the single day when 2 overlapping life insurance policies on Mads were both active simultaneously. He came home with a headache. Belle gave him a powder she said was medicine. Hours later, he was dead. One physician suspected strychnine, but the inquiry went nowhere. Belle collected $5,000 from both policies combined. She packed up what remained of her household and left Chicago for good. She was 41 years old. She had buried a husband, 2 children, and 2 buildings, and every single loss had turned a profit. Belle Gunness arrived in LaPorte, Indiana, with $5,000 and a reputation that hadn't followed her yet. That she used the insurance money to purchase a 42-acre pig farm on the outskirts of town. To her neighbors, she was simply a Norwegian widow starting over. She attended church. She kept to herself. She raised hogs. Nothing about the quiet woman on McClung Road invited suspicion. In April of 1902, she married a local widower and butcher named Peter Gunness. He moved onto the property with his infant daughter from a previous marriage. Within 1 week of the wedding, the baby died of unexplained causes while alone in Belle's care. The death was not investigated. Peter did not have long to process that loss. 8 months into the marriage, he was dead. Belle told authorities that he had been reaching near a high shelf in the kitchen when a heavy sausage-grinding machine toppled onto his skull. Yet the coroner examined the body and did not believe her. An inquest was convened. Neighbors who knew Peter, a hog farmer and butcher by trade, refused to accept that a man who handled heavy equipment daily could die from such a clumsy accident. But Belle appeared before the inquiry visibly pregnant and visibly shattered. She wept. She trembled. The panel believed the widow over the evidence, and no charges were filed. She collected $3,000 in insurance. Now consider what Belle had assembled by the age of 43. She owned the farm outright. She had learned butchering techniques from her second husband. She had buried 2 husbands, collected on every policy, and faced no consequences. Most critically, she had learned that grief, performed convincingly enough, was the most reliable alibi in America. And she was about to use it on an industrial scale. What Belle did next was not impulsive. It was a business model. Beginning around 1905, she placed personal advertisements in Norwegian-language newspapers across the Midwest. The ads were carefully worded. She described herself as a comely widow who owned a large and prosperous farm in one of the finest districts of LaPorte County. She was seeking a gentleman of equal means to join fortunes. The ad closed with a line that would later become infamous: "Triflers need not apply." Dozens of men responded. Belle wrote back with warmth, flattery, and one repeated instruction woven into every exchange: bring cash, come in person, and tell no one. She framed the secrecy as romance. A private affair between 2 hearts finding each other late in life. The men believed her, and Henry Gerholt arrived from Wisconsin. He wrote his family a single letter saying he liked the farm and was in good health. He asked them to send seed potatoes. They never heard from him again. When the family contacted Belle, she told them he had run off with horse traders to Chicago. She kept his trunk and his fur overcoat. John Moe traveled from Minnesota after months of correspondence. Upon arrival, he withdrew a large sum of cash. No one ever saw him again. But a carpenter who did occasional work on Belle's property noticed something unsettling. Mo's trunk was still sitting inside the house, alongside more than a dozen others. Each one belonged to a different man. Belle's bank deposits grew steadily. Her hogs grew fat on feed no neighbor could account for. And the trunks kept collecting in the corners of her home like headstones, with no graves. Each one proof that a man had arrived at this farm. And not one of them had left. Every predator eventually chooses a victim whose family refuses to stop looking. In 1906, a South Dakota farmer named Andrew Helgelian found Belle's advertisement in the Minneapolis Tidende, a Norwegian-language newspaper. He was lonely, aging, and had spent most of his life working land that gave back just enough to survive. Belle's letters offered something else entirely. She wrote to him with an escalating intimacy that was both calculated and relentless. "My heart beats in wild rapture for you," she told him. "Come prepared to stay forever." Andrew believed her. On January 3rd, 1908, he arrived in La Porte carrying his entire life savings. Yet within days he vanished completely. His brother Asla waited for word that never came. He wrote to Belle asking where Andrew was. She was vague, evasive. She suggested Andrew had gone traveling. Asla did not accept this. He knew his brother. Andrew would not disappear without contact. Something was wrong, and Asle began telling Belle he intended to come to La Porte himself to investigate. This is the moment everything shifted. Belle could handle lonely men with no families. She could not handle a brother who asked questions and refused to stop. For the first time, someone was pulling at the thread that held her entire operation together. Her response was not panic. It was planning. She visited a local attorney and drafted a will. She told him her former farmhand, Ray Lamphere, had been making threats against her life, because she began withdrawing large sums from her bank accounts. These were not the actions of a woman afraid for her safety. They were the actions of a woman building a paper trail that would explain a death she intended to stage. Her own. Asle Helgelian did not come to La Porte to mourn. He came to prove something. He arrived shortly after the fire, carrying the letters Belle had written to his brother. He showed them to authorities. Every letter followed the same pattern: affection, urgency, and the insistence that Andrew bring money and keep the visit secret. Asle demanded the property be searched. Police were skeptical, but they agreed. Walking the grounds with a former hired hand, Asle pointed to soft depressions in the soil near the hog pen. Places where the ground had sunk, as though something beneath it had settled over time. The officers began digging. They did not have to dig long. Within hours, the first gunny sack was pulled from the earth. Inside were human remains. Then a second, then a third. Over the course of 2 days, investigators recovered the partial remains of at least 11 people from shallow graves scattered across the property. Among them were men who had answered Belle's advertisements and traveled to La Porte carrying everything they owned. One set of remains belonged to Belle's own foster daughter, Jenny Olson, a girl she had told neighbors was simply away at a boarding school in Los Angeles. Toxicology on the recovered remains revealed traces of strychnine. Belle had not relied on a single method. She had used whatever worked. Word spread fast. Reporters descended from across the country. Thousands of spectators arrived by train, automobile, and bicycle to watch investigators work the property. Vendors sold refreshments at the perimeter. The newspapers gave Belle a gallery of names: Hell's Belle, the Black Widow, the Mistress of Murder Farm. But amid the spectacle, one question cut through the noise. The woman who did all of this, was she actually in that basement? Or had she already gone? Ray Lamphere sat in a LaPorte courtroom in November of 1908, charged with arson and murder. But the trial was never really about him. It was about the headless body in the basement and whether it belonged to Belle Gunness. The prosecution's case rested on one piece of physical evidence: a dental bridgework recovered from the ashes. The sheriff had hired a veteran gold prospector named Louis Schultz to run debris from the farmhouse through a sluice. That when a set of porcelain and gold dental bridges emerged, Belle's own dentist identified them as his work. For the prosecution, this settled the matter. Gunness died in the fire. The defense tore that certainty apart. Local doctors replicated the conditions of the blaze inside a blacksmith's forge. They attached similar bridgework to a human jawbone and subjected it to copper heat. The porcelain crumbled, the gold warped and pitted. Yet the bridgework presented in court had survived almost perfectly intact. A jeweler added another problem. Gold plating on pocket watches found in the same ruins had melted completely, while the dental gold showed barely any damage. The implication was difficult to ignore. The teeth had not survived the fire. They had been placed there after it. Then came the testimony of a neighbor named John Anderson. He told the court that just 2 days before the fire, he had seen Belle driving her buggy along the road. Beside her sat a large, unfamiliar woman he had never seen before and never saw again. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict that said everything without saying it directly. They convicted Lamphere of arson. They acquitted him of murder, because to find him guilty of killing Belle Gunness, they would first have to believe she was dead. And on that, 12 people were not convinced. In January of 1910, Ray Lamphere was dying of tuberculosis inside the state prison at Michigan City, Indiana. He asked to see a clergyman. Reverend Edwin Schell arrived, and what Lamphere told him became the closest thing to a final answer this case would ever produce. Yet he said Belle had killed 42 men by his count, perhaps more. He said the amounts she took from each victim ranged from $1,000 to $32,000, and that her accumulated fortune exceeded $250,000, a sum worth millions in today's money. He described her methods in terms that left no room for doubt about what kind of person she was. Then he explained the fire. Days before the blaze, Belle traveled to Chicago and brought a woman back to the farm under the pretense of hiring household help. She killed the woman, removed identifying features, and dressed the body in her own clothing. She placed her dental bridgework beside the corpse to ensure it would be mistaken for her. She then took the lives of her own children, the only people who could ever identify her with certainty, and arranged them in the basement and set the stage for Lamphere to light the fire. He said he drove her to a train station 12 miles from LaPorte the night before. He put her on a southbound train. She vanished into the American dark. Sightings followed for decades. Chicago, New York, San Francisco. Then in 1931, a woman named Esther Carlson was arrested in Los Angeles for poisoning a man for his money. She bore a striking resemblance to Belle. Photographs of children were found in her trunk. She died in custody before trial. Norwegian researcher Knut Erik Jensen later traced Carlson's history and found records placing her in Connecticut in 1907, when Belle was still in LaPorte, suggesting they were two separate women. Others remain unconvinced. In 2007, forensic scientists exhumed the grave marked as Belle Gunness's at Forest Home Cemetery outside Chicago. They hoped modern DNA testing would settle everything. The results came back inconclusive. No one has ever proven she died. No one has ever found her. The farm on McClung Road is quiet now, but Belle Gunness left behind something worse than bodies. She left behind a question she designed never to be answered. And if you made it this far into a story about a woman who outsmarted every system meant to stop her, then you already know this channel doesn't serve you the watered-down version of history. We dig where others won't. So do yourself a favor. Click the like button so this story reaches someone who's never heard it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.